Our gospel passage today comes from Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are a stumbling block to me. You are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? What will they give in return for their life?" This is the word of the Lord. Well, it's September. Can't believe that has happened in a time when we can't tell if time is going fast or slow or just jumping all around. We have reached September and it is Labor Day weekend. We will be sharing communion during this service. If you have something to drink and a bite to eat, it doesn't matter. It matters that our hearts are together. Now, this is probably the most unusual Labor Day weekend that we've seen in our lifetime, but it's still a holiday that I think is too important to just ignore. This is the day when we have been asked to remember those people throughout our history, the people who took a stand and sometimes gave their own lives so that we could make a living wage, have time to rest from our labor, not worry about repercussions from our jobs. Now, all of this began to come together in the late 1800s. Congress had passed an 8-hour-day law in 1868, but the federal authorities didn't enforce it, and the struggle continued, and there were demonstrations throughout the United States with the goal of ending wage slavery, for the goal of enforcing that 8-hour workday. This holiday really is about justice, it's about building community, and it is about caring for those in need. It's about gratitude for those who have gone before us. It's about hope for the future we hope to see in our lifetime. I think it's really interesting with this holiday, there is not one big name that's associated with Labor Day or associated with these rights that we celebrate, because they came through a grassroots movement made up of many unlikely leaders in cities and in small towns throughout the country, throughout the world, taking a stand, risking their jobs, risking their lives to make working conditions safe and fair. So I think it's very fitting that in our scripture reading today, we're looking at the story of the life and times of Moses. Seems appropriate, for Moses is known as the liberator. And we might say that Moses was the original labor organizer. Now, we remember from our previous story that Moses was kept alive by his Hebrew mother, who placed him in a basket along a riverbank. He was raised in the royal palace of the king of Egypt as a son of the Pharaoh's daughter. Then we're not given many details, but it seems that he did live a privileged and sheltered childhood. For the story then jumps to one day after he had grown up, and Moses went out from the palace and saw the people and their forced labor. And he seems shocked, and he acts very impulsively. When he sees an Egyptian who is beating a Hebrew worker, in a rage he kills the Egyptian overseer and he buries him in the sand. Well, that story got apparently out pretty quickly. The next day he was trying to break up a fight, and the man says to him, "So, are you going to kill me too?" And the Pharaoh gets word of what has happened, and he knows in order to bring order to his land, Moses would have to pay with his life. So Moses does the noble thing, and he ran away. But we see here a young man who is very conflicted. He's idealistic, and he's impulsive. He comes to the defense of the underdog, but he doesn't have the maturity to know what to do next. Now he's on the run and he's forced to start his life over again. He does gain a new family. While he's resting by a well, he helps a group of young women who are trying to get water and who are being bullied by some shepherds. As he helps them out, he leads them back home, and their father is so impressed that he's invited to stay for dinner and ends up marrying one of the daughters. So he has a new life, a new job, a new family, but he still doesn't know who he is inside. He's having an identity crisis that he tries to cover up and bury with his past. He names his first son Gershom, which means stranger, outcast. His past is still haunting him. His future feels vague. He is settled and unsettled at the same time. And that's where we find him in the reading we read today. He's working as a shepherd for his father-in-law, which is quite a change from having been raised in a palace. He's learned a few life lessons, like how to work for a living, how to patiently wait for sheep to graze, while at the same time watching for danger over every hill. This is why a bush on fire would definitely have caught his attention, because normally flames mean danger. Some wildfire could be starting up. So he moves closer to find out which way is the wind blowing and where is this going to go. But God now has his attention. And then Moses hears a voice telling him to stop right where he is and take off his shoes. This is holy ground. This is a holy moment. For life is about to change for Moses. God speaks from this flame. I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cry. I know their suffering, and I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So I will send you to the Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. Moses is like most unintentional leaders, very quick to back out of this offer. His first objection reveals that confused identity that he's dealing with. Who am I to go to the Pharaoh to bring Israelites out of Egypt? He's reluctant to take on a bold and, what is really a pretty hopeless task. He's questioning himself. He's questioning God. He was born Hebrew but raised Egyptian. Now he's in the family of a priest of Midian. He's not exactly an authority on the God of Israel. Surely there's someone who knows the theology better. But the voice tells him again, you will go to the elders of Israel. You will tell him and all of them that the God of their ancestors has promised to bring them up out of this misery in Egypt. And he's still not convinced, but what if they don't listen to me or believe me? What if they say you're just hearing voices? He knows that people expect proof, signs, miracles. He's never done anything like that. You can almost hear God saying, fine. He turns a shepherd's staff into a snake and then back into the staff again. Moses holds out his hand and it turns white and leprous and broken, and then it returns back to normal. And one would think that something that frightening would convince him. He's pretty determined this is not a job for him. So he reminds God that he's not a good speaker. He stutters a bit. God answers, who do you think gives speech to mortals? But I will be with you. I will teach you what to say. As Martin Buber has said, it is laid upon the stammering to bring the voice of heaven to earth. Moses begs one more time, please pick someone else. The scripture says it nicely when it says that the anger of the Lord was kindled. God gives a little and says he can bring his brother Aaron with him to share in the speaking. And then Moses turns the question to God's identity. Well, when they ask me, what is God's name? What do I tell them? And God's cryptic response is, I am who I am. Some translations will say, I will be what I will be. I will be what I am becoming. Maybe God is reserving the right to identify God's self on God's own terms. I can be whatever I will be. And it could be that God moves through history with us as we change and grow in our understanding. God will be who we come to understand and see God to be. What we are witnessing in this story is a God who is fully engaged in the plight of the oppressed, a God who is moved by the cries of the people, a God who responds. And this is the God that we see throughout our scriptures, especially in the work and the words of the Hebrew prophets, in the life and the words and the ministry of Jesus, a God who hears and responds. Now, Moses' past life was a mess. He was living in the shadow of his Egyptian brothers. He was separated from his biological brother Aaron and his sister Miriam, and he was a person bursting with anger and energy, and he had made mistakes he could never take back. But from our perspective, maybe Moses' dual identity makes him the perfect person to confront Pharaoh on behalf of the Hebrews. Despite his reluctance and his own earlier many misguided actions, we've seen that Moses is truly driven by a deep sense of justice. He has a desire to intervene for the victimized, for those who are mistreated, whenever he sees injustice taking place. It seems even now easier to see those kind of characteristics in others, and to assume, like Moses, there just are better people to take the lead, to start a movement, to change the world. Moses wasn't perfect, but like us, he was enthusiastic and afraid at the same time. He was broken and confused. He was tired and yet hopeful that life could be better for everyone. That's where God needs us to be. God is seeking to enter other stories of freedom, the need for freedom in our world and in our time. God still hears the cries of people asking just for a fair chance in life, for freedom, for opportunity. So if this is true of the God that we worship, who is God calling to step in and join a movement now? There are so many needs that cross our paths each day on TV, social media, when we drive through the city, stories told from the other side of the world, stories told by our friends and family. No one person can solve the problems of the world, but each person has the power, the talent, the skills, the connections to do something, maybe just one something. Maybe just to change one life, to tackle one problem. Maybe God is asking, what one problem has been tugging at your heart? What task might God have in mind that might be just the perfect fit for you? Where might your somewhat misguided and misshapen past be taking you? It doesn't have to be spectacular. It doesn't have to even seem particularly holy. But it's when you let God love and lead wherever the need is, you can be there too. And you can count on the fact that it won't be easy. The day that Moses heard from God was the day that his troubles began. Pharaoh's army tried to kill him. The people he came to help complained and rebelled. And Moses died without ever reaching that promised land. But his efforts did change history, and slaves were freed, and a nation became into being because he overcame those fears and chose to act. Who knows what God could do today through you, through us, through all of God's people stepping out in faith, standing up for justice, standing up for the justice that Jesus stood for. So Jesus invites everyone into God's beloved community. Jesus offers an unconditional welcome. A welcome to the table, a welcome to share the gift of love. So today we reaffirm God's commitment to us and our commitment to care for one another. With a simple meal of a piece of bread, cracker, a sip of juice, as a symbol of our identity as followers of the way of the God of Moses and the way of Christ. So we share bread together in remembrance of the life of Christ, the life of Christ given so that we might know God's redeeming love, given so that we would be empowered to forgive as we are forgiven, empowered to do something and to say something for justice,